This is Tim.
And this is Adam.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Adam in Nagoya. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Tim. It's kind of depressing looking at all the recent spikes in Corona and Olympic news and all that kind of stuff, but keeping my head above water.
Right, yeah. Corona's been rising here, and there's still insistence that we must have the Tokyo Olympics, but pretty much anybody you talk to will say, why do they have to have the Olympics? Just give up. Just cancel it.
I saw somewhere somebody was saying that if the government here decides to cancel it, then they have to pay like a forfeiture fine or something like that to the IOC. But if the IOC decides to postpone it, then maybe vice versa or something like that. So it's kind of like they're playing chicken with each other, I think. But anyway,
I see. That makes sense. Okay, so we have a comic this time called Tales from the Interface, Issue 3. Now, Mulele and I talked about the first issue of this comic several years ago. I think it was 2018.
Okay. Which
the creator mentions in his email. His name is Emmanuel Filteau, if I'm pronouncing that right. From the back cover of the comic, I see that he is in Montreal. And so this third book, so at the time that he sent this to me, April 15th, they had a Kickstarter running. But he said he said he didn't mind if this didn't go up until after the Kickstarter was over, which is likely going to happen. So, as he describes the comic in his email, in a slowly decaying futuristic city, social class is determined by the amount of time you spend in a virtual world called the Interface, a dystopian megalopolis, a harsh, violent city where citizens get slaughtered at the first sign of unruliness by the robopaxes, nightmarish, Lovecraftian, tentacular monsters. This grimful backup is punctuated with a good dose of dark humor, provided by the often clueless inhabitants of the city. So, yeah, I read this comic, and then it dawned on me that we had talked about it before. Well, no, what happened was, I read this comic. At the end, there was a link to the website. So the comic is a web comic, although I noticed that as we're recording this, he's in the pages that he's posting on the webcomic, he's only about halfway through this issue.
Yeah, I noticed that myself. Yeah, so I'm not sure what that's about.
So then I went back to the beginning and oh yeah, Mulele and I talked about this. I remembered parts of it, and I didn't go back and listen to that, but when we talked about it then, we were kind of like, okay, this is really good, but we can't understand what's going on. And, usually that's bad, but for this one, I guess, it was okay because it was interesting, even though the situation was kind of vague. This one, comparing to that one, I see that some of the same characters are in it, but it's a completely different aspect of this world. And I did not read issue 2, so I'm not sure what I missed in between.
It's interesting that you say that, because I read this one and I feel this is a really weird jumping on point for me.
Yeah.
I didn't know at all what was going on. I kind of got a hint of what was going on, but it was intriguing enough that I decided to go back and read the first issue through the webcomic. And you're right, it's very, very different. It's different in the type of story it's telling, but it's also different in the artwork and the kind of scale of the story and a lot of things. But going back and rereading that, and because I read it on the web, I don't know if I got to issue 2 or not, because it's not, it's not put as books.
Well, the cover of issue 2 was there. I got that far, and then I didn't have any more time.
Okay. Yeah, but I felt like I can kind of put the story together from issue 1 and 3. More or less, I could kind of figure out what was going on.
Well, having read issue 3 made issue 1 make somewhat more sense.
Okay.
It's issue 1 starts out with the guy fighting the incredibly giant lobster.
Or crab,
and then he leaves that area eventually, and you see that he's he looks completely different, and that just completely puzzled us at the time, I think. But now that I apparently that world is the interface. I don't know. I'm still a little fuzzy on some of the details of this world. But in this issue, we're not in that sort of virtual reality or whatever it is. It's the real world for this dystopian future. And I don't know. It's like some of it's pretty gross. It's like I had trouble looking at some of the pages because like some people are recycled, and you have a limited number of lives, and I'm not sure how having another life works exactly, but I think there was something in it like that I guess they toss all the dead people in together, and then the computers are able to sense which ones have remaining lives, kind of like a video game. And those people are sort of put back together and given another life. But the character here who's given another life, he's the same age that he was when he died. He's not like a baby or something.
Right, they're not reborn. I think they're just kind of reassembled. So it's almost like they get a second shot. They're like a cat. They have a second shot at life, right? So, like they get put through a meat grinder, and any parts that can be salvaged get salvaged and put back together, and any parts that, can't be salvaged get tossed in the garbage or something, right? It looks like. So, that was actually kind of a funny concept to me because... basically this one, compared to the first one, that they don't really talk about this issue, but in this third issue, they talk about the fact that, it's a very, very, I don't know, it's almost like a post-apocalyptic kind of world where these big tentacle monsters I think they're robotic, but these big tentacle robotic monsters come and kill you for any kind of offense, right? Like an illegal gathering or whatever. They'll come and tear you apart. But it's not really a death sentence, because they'll just put you back together if you have enough, kind of social credit or something like that. So
yeah,
and it looks like the interface, so the interface is essentially kind of like this, I don't know, like the Matrix in a way, or like the Soma dreams from like Brave New World or something. It's like this fantasy world where you can kind of play out all these different fantasies, but it looks like it has real world consequences, right? So if they get hurt in the interface, their body actually reacts that way. And the first issue, he had like these little nano bugs that crawled all over him and healed his wounds and sewed him back, kind of sutured him back together. But in this issue, I think he's like his body's completely worthless. So they kind of like hack it up with a chainsaw and then put it back together, right? So
yeah. Yeah, so, like we're giving him another life, and there's this chainsaw. Like what? It doesn't look like you're giving him another life. But
yeah, that's pretty gnarly too. The way he drew that, it was pretty like the spine is like separated and the guts are kind of pouring out, and it was a pretty gruesome couple pages there for sure.
But yeah, I mean the art. You talk about that. I mean, even before I'd kind of remembered that we talked about this before, I was thinking, this is a really well done art job, I think.
Yeah, I thought the art was beautiful. In fact, it's kind of interesting because his, I don't want to say it, like his actual like drafting skills have, I think, improved as far as like the actual just skill of making lines on paper, have improved since the first issue. His characters look more consistent from panel to panel, and the composition looks more natural. You don't have some of the kind of there was some weird composition in the first issue. But having said that, I think that the color in the first issue and the big expansive kind of creatures and landscapes and stuff were really beautiful. The color, these bright pinks and teals and stuff like that were really, really pretty. It reminds me a little bit of like Saga or something like that. The color work does. So I'm a big fan of the artwork for sure. Especially, I love how he draws these big sea creatures in the first, especially in the first book. But these, big, beautiful sea creatures that are kind of weird and stuff like that. I love that kind of stuff. And there wasn't any of that in issue 3, right? Issue 3 is all stuck in the real world where they're being chased by giant rats, and it's just kind of grim and bleak, and so all the fantasy stuff is kind of gone. But
but then I was interested by the part where this woman, I forgot her name, she ends up at this like library that's hidden out in the wilderness somewhere, I guess, or there are pipes and stuff around it. And it gets a little bit of a Fahrenheit 451 feel then, because like she hasn't seen like nobody in this world has seen books basically except the people who are at this library. A lot of people don't know how to read. So that was interesting. And she's looking at a copy of The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I liked that. It's kind of that I feel like the author is making sort of a statement about, about social, I don't know, kind of a social statement about the way the world is going now, right? Because people have forgotten how to read. And there's a comment that I really like. It's on page 20, I think. And she says, oh, maybe it's not page 20, I'm sorry. She says something to the effect of, anybody can come down here, but it takes work. And so nobody does. And I really like that because it's this idea that even now, like, there's all these things that there's much better media to consume. There's really good stuff that you can get to, but it's a lot easier to just sit and flick through your phone and look at pictures like that, right? And so it's kind of a critique of modern society, I feel like, where, essentially the author's saying that if you actually put the effort, there is beauty around you, but we're much more happy to be distracted by our phones and stuff like that, right? So,
yeah. Oh, the quote you were talking about is on page 25. And they're talking about, like, trees and comment like, like there used to be more than one tree, right? And this woman who apparently works at this library, who's called Shay, and she wears a Che Guevara type hat,
right,
is saying, oh yeah, much more. And she's looking at this picture of a really unhealthy looking forest. But, to them, it's amazing to see all these tall trees, even though they hardly have any branches, because, they don't have anything to compare it to, I guess.
Yeah. That whole little scene there where she's in the library is really cool. I liked that. There was another comment where she said something like, people get really anxious when the interface is not whispering in their ear. And that kind of made me think about, there's a really interesting interview with Louis C.K. on like the Conan O'Brien show, I think, where he's talking about, how he was driving and he felt this sadness coming upon him. And he thought, I've got to turn something on. I've got to turn on my phone or listen to a podcast or something, because just sitting there alone with your thoughts is really hard for people now, and that's something that I thought in this is like, it's escapism for sure. People don't want to face their own thoughts. That's like the most terrifying thing. So I think that there's some kind of little philosophical bits going on here, which are really interesting.
Yeah. Now, what's the deal with these cookies? There are these, you see it on the cover too, is like a gingerbread man, these cookies are called dearly departed cookies. And apparently people have always been an ingredient, but now they have sugar.
Yeah. I liked that joke a lot, actually. Like, because he leads up to it saying, you guys know what the secret is. And he said, it has people. It's like, that's never been a secret, right? So, yeah, I like that joke, actually. And so I guess you could say they're gingerbread men. They're more of man ginger, or I don't know, man gingerbread or something.
A ginger man or something.
Yeah. So that's got that kind of, what is it, the Soylent Green kind of thing going on, right? Mm-hmm. It's classic staple of dystopian future stories. I like that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it just kind of shows that it plays into that same idea that life is very disposable. They can put it back together if they want to, or, if they don't, if they decide not to, if the people run out of lives, then they eat them. So it's a very, coming from the first book where it's got these big fantasy elements where you're often fighting these creatures and stuff, then you come into this one where it's all focused on the real world and how bad everything is, but it still feels really fantasy-like, doesn't it? Like,
Well, yeah. Not a very attractive fantasy, but yeah, fantasy.
Right. There's still like blue people and, weird creatures and stuff like that here and there. So it's not really set in the real world, even when they are not in the interface.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm wondering if he has like an overall plan for this, like it is going to end at a certain point, or is this just an ongoing type of comic, like, that it'll keep going until he gets tired of it?
Yeah, I kind of found myself wondering the same thing because, these first 3 issues kind of has him landing this job working for the Trans-Cervical or whatever it's called. But after that point, I don't know where it's going to go from there. So it is kind of interesting. And there's this character, Mr. Holloway, who you don't really know if he's a good person or a bad person. He seems kind of this ominous character that's inviting him to work for Trans-Cervical, but you don't really ever get a good idea of if Trans-Cervical is actually a good place or if it's not, and if Mr. Holloway is a genuine person or not. So that's something I'm curious to see where that goes. Even this main character, Gautier or whatever his name is, I don't think you don't really get a clear idea if he's a good person or not either. He looks kind of like this, I don't know, like a heroin junkie or something like that. And
well, he's got a weird hairdo. He doesn't have very much hair, just a few tufts of it at various parts of his head.
Yeah, he kind of looks like Keith Flint from The Prodigy a little bit. That's what I kept thinking.
Okay, so. And his wife's name is Clara, and she's the one who goes to that archive out in wherever it is she goes. And Gautier is the guy who died and was given an extra life or whatever.
Right. Right.
So, and I did see they were in the first issue. I had kind of forgotten about them, but yeah, so they seem to be the main characters of this who were following through it. But like, if this were to be like a single story that has a definite end point, I mean, partly, we expect that it's going to be like somehow this system is overthrown and something better takes its place. But I don't know. That seems like that would be hard to do convincingly. It all seems to be... It doesn't seem like if the system went down that the replacement would be better.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem possible, really. It's pretty bleak. Like, the world is pretty messed up. Like, no matter what they do, they're not going to be... It's not ever going to be very happy.
No.
So... Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to point out. Did you happen to notice on page 40, sort of out of nowhere, Ernie and Bert make an appearance?
Yes. Yeah, there are these two people who look suspiciously like Ernie and Bert. They even have yellow and orange skin.
Yeah, and there wasn't any explanation of why they're there. They're there for one panel, and then they're gone. And it was just a really...
celebrity
really funny,
cameo.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what that was about, but I love the way they're drawn like real people and stuff. That was pretty good. Yeah. This isn't really having to do with Ernie and Bert, but when I was reading this, I kept thinking it reminded me of something, and it just now came to my mind what that is. There is a book that was put out by Fantagraphics in 2019 called Alienation. I don't know if you read that or not.
No.
But it actually is sort of similar to this because, like people are essentially living online in these kind of weird, these weird communities, and it's almost like a virtual reality world, and they're actually just kind of artificial organs or something like that. It's kind of a weird science fiction dystopian kind of thing, similar to this, but that one is more about the whole online world than this one is. But this one it reminded me of that a bit. The artwork in this is a bit more polished. That's a bit more kind of rough, but they're both really interesting in the same way. And I think they're kind of asking the same kind of questions and stuff. So if anybody who's listening to this is a fan of this comic book, Alienation is another good one that might be kind of scratching that same itch, I think.
I see. Oh, I was just noticing on page 43, you can see in the background, like on the wall, there's a picture of the character who was, well, as he is fighting the giant lobster from issue 1. The way Gautier looked when he was in the interface with the green skin and the kind of white cap.
Yeah, you're right.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's some interesting little, things in the background. The more you look, there's a lot of little hidden details. Like all the art on the walls. There's references to certain comic books and works of art and things like that. So,
right. At the archive, there are all kinds of artworks on the wall that Clara has never seen. One of them is the Frank Frazetta painting that was on the Molly Hatchet album cover.
Yeah.
But there's also got like The Last Supper and stuff like that.
The Persistence of Memory and Hokusai and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, and American Gothic is there in the bottom. Yeah, it is a very it's definitely a comic book that rewards you for taking your time on the page. The more you kind of look at the details and stuff like that, I think you can tell he's putting a lot in there. So. Yeah, I mean, I think I really liked this. Actually, it was one of the first kind of webcomics that I've read where I wanted to go back and check the earlier material, just to kind of not only to figure out what was going on, but just to kind of see where it had come, where it had started, and where it had come from and stuff like that. And like I said, I really, really liked the first issue a lot. It just has these really beautiful colors, big. The scope of the story is really big and stuff like that, and this third volume, it starts getting more interesting, and the storytelling starts to make more sense and pull all of those things together. So I'm actually really curious to see where this goes next.
It's also bleaker, so
it's a lot bleaker. Yeah, and I think I tend to be drawn towards bleak things in the first place.
Okay.
So that appeals to me, but...
Okay. Okay, well, I'll definitely link to his site in the show notes, and people can read, up to the middle of Volume 3 at this point. Yeah, it's interesting to me that he's only partway through this volume in his webcomic version, but...
I think you can buy the books also from his website, right? The complete volume. So if they want to jump ahead of the story, they can do it that way as well.
Right. Well, I guess this third volume is the one that he's been kickstarting.
Yeah, and it looks like it was successful, or if it's still going. I mean, he met his goal anyhow, so...
Well, yeah, it looks like the campaign is completed, and they quadrupled their goal.
Right, yeah. It was a modest goal, I think, anyway, but yeah, I think he did really well on this Kickstarter, so obviously he has people supporting the book, which is good, because that means he might actually finish it. So
yeah.
I'm curious to see where he goes next, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if you would like us to critique your comic, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. So, Adam, thanks again for coming on here.
Thanks for having me, Tim. It's a pleasure as always.
Tales from the Interface is at tfti.incorpora.com. That's INKORPORA.com. Wednesday on Deconstructing Comics, I talked to Derek and Emily Ritter, whose company Sequential Potential helps academics turn their perhaps dry, boring essays into engaging comics that have a story. Then Adam joins me to talk about the latest book from Sean Michael Wilson, the Minamata story, an eco-tragedy, with art by Akiko Shimojima, about the 1950s mass mercury poisoning by industrial waste here in Japan. Not an easy subject, but an important one to remember. And Critiquing Comics will return in 2 weeks. See you then.